Hi, guys, and welcome. This is Jen Gaeta Siciliano, artist, memoir writer, bipolar psychiatric survivor, and your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast, the place that offers an alternative perspective on mental illness, highlighting creativity, non-conventional healing, and breaking on through to the other side. If you are ready for a new narrative on the mental realm that celebrates crazy and cool without penalty, then Not As Crazy As You Think is for you. Hello, this is Jen Gaeta Siciliano, your host of Not As Crazy As You Think podcast. Today, we have a very special guest. He is one of my favorite people to paint. He's one of my body painting models. He's a life and fitness model. He's also a lawyer and a writer and a wonderful person. And he had a story to tell, and I wanted him to come on board to share, and he was willing to do so and open up about a history of mental illness in his family. And I want to discuss what that means. So his name is David Pumo. I'm so happy he could be here. Thank you so much, David, for joining us.
Of course. Anytime I spend with you is fun. So,
I'm so happy. So one of the things I wanted to bring up is the real prevalence of these what they would call disorders today. You know, I don't buy into that, but there was stuff going on in your family. There were a few suicides. There were a few experiences with severe depression. So can you just start with where it first entered your family? I mean, you mentioned your grandmother and also her brother.
Yeah.
What happened going that far back?
So going that far back, you know, particularly with my grandmother's brother, who, killed himself when he was relatively a young man. So I was not around. And that was back in the old days when we didn't talk about it.
Right.
So I don't know anything. Don't know anything about him. All I know is that he killed himself. The next time it kind of popped up in a big way was my grandmother, my mother's mother. And when my mother was just 6 years old, my grandmother had her first nervous breakdown. And it was a big one. And I don't know all that much about nervous breakdowns other than what I experienced through her. And I know that they come in all shapes and sizes.
It's not a term that they use anymore.
Right. But that's what they called it up until her last one in the 80s. They were still using that term. And she was hospitalized when my mother was 6 years old. My brother had an older brother, 3 years older, I think. And, the two of them and my grandfather, basically were on their own while she was in the hospital. And then when she was home, she was basically out of it for a while. So my mother always says she, grew up at a very young age. She became the woman in the house when she was 6 years old. And in a lot of ways lost a lot of her childhood because of those experiences. But my grandmother got electroshock therapy at the time and bounced back,
Wow.
Eventually kind of, got through it and became healthy again. And this happened for a second time in, I think it was 1960, because from the stories I've heard, it was when my brother Tom had just been born, my older brother, who was born in 1959. So he was an infant when it happened. And same thing. I don't know if there are always triggering events. I don't know if there are. I don't know what the triggering event were those first two times. But the same thing happened. She goes into this state where I don't even know how to describe it, except I call it an altered state. She just becomes a different person.
Right.
She becomes angry and everything freaks her out. And which is particularly striking because my grandmother was the stereotypical, in a way, Italian grandmother from the Prego sauce commercials. I mean, she was a short, round woman in a dress, below her knees with a thick-heeled, lace-up little shoes that she wore, but also like the the best at being this character. Like everyone loved her.
Yeah.
She was truly loving, giving, warm, outgoing, friendly person. Loved children. And when a child walked in the room, they gravitated toward her, and she just had a way of, boom, becoming that, she could talk to a child on a child's level. She was the best mother, the best grandmother. And yes, she cooked like crazy, the best cook, an incredible cook, all of the other Italian grandmothers in the family, all the aunts and uncles, like, worshipped her cooking.
Yeah.
There were maybe one or two who were close to her, always with all the specials. Because that's who she was.
Right.
She was she was like the center of the family, and it's a big family. So when she slipped into this other state, it was particularly striking.
Yes.
So the third time it happened was when I was maybe 20 years old, in 1980 or so. I think must have been around 80, 81, because before I met my husband, who I met in 83. And she just becomes a completely different person. That was the first time I witnessed it. Now, that time, I know that there was what I would call a triggering event.
Okay.
Her husband, my grandfather, had gone into the hospital. I don't even remember what it was. Maybe it was prostate cancer, some typical guy thing, but it was a big deal. And he got through it, and he survived, and he was fine. But, it was a big deal, and it was touch and go, and it was very scary.
Right.
And that seemed to trigger it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Send her, for lack of a better medical term, over the edge.
Right.
It sent her into this state. And so she became this person again, this freaked out, crazy, what terrible word to use, but this freaked out, scared, this person I didn't recognize.
Right.
But also, one of the things that she became also was she would say things that she never used to say. Things would come out of her like she had been holding back. Right. She was saying, like, one of the things I remember is, I don't remember what I was wearing. I mean, it was very 80s. It was I had some kind of like t-shirt with a tank top over it and the design or something, but she looked at me and she made a comment, like something kind of implying that it was girly or that it was gay. And I was like, so my grandmother, who had probably been picking up on that, about me,
sure,
was saying it out loud. And I was like, wow, okay.
Wow.
But she never would have said anything like that before.
Right, right.
She pointed out, why is he dressed like that, kind of thing, But that's who she became. So again, at this time, she had electroshock therapy, and my mother would explain it to me, because I heard in 1980, 1981, electroshock therapy, and I'm picturing old movies. I'm picturing One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I'm picturing all this stuff. And she's like, no, first of all, they're sedated and, blah, blah, blah. It's not painful or anything like that. And by the way, it really worked the last 2 times.
Right.
So she went through that again, and it did work. And I remember visiting her after at home. She was like tired and everything, but she was back to herself. And then for some reason, she deteriorated again and slipped back into it. And the doctors kind of said, at this point, she's kind of too old. It's too dangerous. So they didn't go that route again. And she just kind of deteriorated, and, she stayed that way, but, lived with my grandfather until she could no longer live with my grandfather. And then she ended up in a home, and, eventually she deteriorated so much that she was in a pretty high level of care facility.
How old was she when she did die?
I think over 90, in her early 90s. She lived a long life.
So she had ECT just twice.
3 times.
3 times.
When my mother was 6, in 1960, and then again in the 80s.
Wow. Because, one of the things that they find out with this electroconvulsive shock therapy is that it's being widely used more now than it has in other time periods, which is really interesting. But they do have it so under control now. Like, in other words, like you said, they give sedation, and they do the same thing now. And it's so slight that it's not like you're biting down on a thing and,
Right. Oh,
making
real?
sure like
Okay.
you're not shaking like Jack
Mhm.
Nicholson in that movie.
Right.
But one of the things that they do know is that it causes long lasting brain damage.
Right.
And even to speak to just a year ago, this book was put out. And I actually really enjoyed the book. His name is Roy Richard Grinker, and the book is Nobody's Normal: How Culture Created the Stigma of Mental Illness. It's interesting because he comes from a family of psychiatrists. So his take is psychiatry is a good thing. You know what I mean? And actually, to be fair, he gives a lot of history of why psychiatry mattered during the time of war, because they were the ones that stepped in first trying to help the soldiers. So there's a history there that I really never even knew. So I'll give it to him for that. But he blames the culture. I mean, the problem with stigma of mental illness on our culture, just culture in general, how we view it. But the thing is, it's the ongoing thing that something's got to be fixed, and we're going to go in to fix you. Back in the day, I come from an Italian family too. And I have history in my family. My cousin's schizophrenic. We always look back though, he deteriorated so much because they put him on such heavy medication, which we'll get to also. I know that you have experience with medication in your family. Right. And, it's just when you only look at mental illness as something that's biological and has to be treated by some kind of, outside force, whether it be drugs or this kind of electricity to snap you out of it, it may work temporarily. But the cost of the way your body is reacting to that and how you walk away, you might at first seem to be okay, but it's not like long lasting healing. It's a treatment that kind of snaps you out of it, Right. And I know that, like I said, this particular book, he talks about ECT a lot and how he wants it to be used more. And I'm thinking, people are starting to be vocal about it and say, listen, I lost my memory. I used to work like 50 hours a week and now I can't even do 3 hours of volunteering a day at a local cafe. Like these aren't necessarily the best choices, but back in the day, they didn't have anything else. There was no conversation. I'm from an immigrant family, an Italian immigrant family. I know when you describe your grandmother, I'm like, oh, that's like my grandmother. That's like my aunt. That's, and who knows what they were holding in women. Right. And ECT is used twice as much on women as on men. So a lot of the times, when women got angry or they had feelings, like they were too wrapped up in taking care of everybody.
Right.
I know, like a lot of the times when I feel overwhelmed with how much I got to give to, my family or whatever, I start some of my, what they would call bipolar irritability starts like acting up. And I'm just like, okay, I got to chill out. But because I know other coping skills and those things were never taught to our families, Yeah. I think a lot of people in the immigrant or, coming from outside backgrounds, they were not led to be helped in any other way. So my heart goes out to your grandmother because, I'm sure that they didn't really talk to her about her feelings.
I highly doubt it.
She seemed to get better though after the electroshock. So she was able to then communicate again. She had no long-lasting problems as much as anybody knew, correct?
To the best of my awareness, I didn't know her before, but so my entire relationship with her was between the second episode and the third episode. I was born in 1961. By that time, she was better, and all I ever knew was this happy woman. A woman I assumed was happy. And, she had a good life. She had a very happy marriage. My grandfather owned a barber shop and they bought a house together when they were, a 2-family house in Ridgewood, Queens. And, they were an immigrant success story, and they had a happy life. They gardened together. They did, they had loved their grandchildren. There wasn't anything obviously, that problematic for them. So, that's all I knew of her.
Right.
Was between those two incidents.
My heart goes to her because I know what it was when I was the family member with the mental illness. You know what I mean? Like how everyone kind of just sees it one way. But I know that, here it was, I'm so much younger than your grandmother. And then like, even decades later, they really weren't talking to me about what was really bugging me. And I know the things that it looked like I was doing on the outside were absolutely insane. Right. And yet I had so many reasons for it. But when you don't discuss it because, nobody's really giving you that compassion, I feel for her because there's just no way of knowing. Right. And so the only thing that's on the record is that she had all these problems and she had all these treatments and it seemed to work. And then it didn't seem to, you know what I mean?
Right.
So it's tough, but that's the only thing that they look at when they look at like genetic factors in a family, right?
Right. But what was interesting about what you're saying is, I think that is one of the reasons that my mother became so, and I want to use the word obsessed. I don't know if that's fair, but she certainly, spent a lot of time in her life looking into it and examining it and trying to understand it.
Wow.
Because, the biggest event that happened in our life as a family, I have an older brother and a younger brother, is that my younger brother ended up being very severely impacted by this gene, I suppose. And at the age of 25, killed himself. And that was another one of those cases. I think that is the thing that triggered my mother, both my parents the most. Obviously it would, but because that was one of those situations where it's like you say, we as a family, knew him. We were very close. It wasn't like he was off in his own world, distant somewhere, me and John were like, he was a year and 4 months younger than me. And we used to sometimes intentionally pass ourselves off as twins.
Oh, really?
We were very, very close. We were one grade apart. When we were in high school, like we had the same circle of friends. We spent a lot of time together. He was definitely closer to me than anyone on earth. And I wasn't even aware of it until somewhere near the end. He was in college and I remember him. He was his last year of college and he was upstate New York in Binghamton, which I went there for a year or two. And then I had transferred out because I just could not live in that kind of place anymore. Where it was freezing cold in the winter. And, I guess as also, being a young guy and being gay, although there's plenty of gay people in Binghamton, but I don't know. It did not click for me. I needed to be in the city. And he was up there too. And I could kind of sense his isolation being up there, even though he had friends, but he was kind of becoming more and more isolated in his own head. Some of his friends were my friends. He lived with a woman who, one of his roommates was someone I had as a roommate. And, but it was like the end of his final semester in his senior year. And we were talking on the phone and I could sense that he was really, really down and really, really stressing. And was he going to get through this and and really, really freaking out about being able to finish the year. And we were having a conversation on the phone. And he asked me what he should do. And I said, I think you should pack a bag, get on a bus, come to New York and crash in my apartment. And don't worry about anything and fuck school, blow off the year. Just come here and relax. And I will deal with mom and dad. No one is going to get in your way. I just want you to get over here until you're ready to figure it out. And he's like, why? And I said, and I remember saying this, because I don't want you to kill yourself.
Wow.
Because that was the first time that I really got a feeling that he was going down a deep hole. And he started to cry. And he said, yes, actually, I have been thinking about that. And he started telling me about it.
Wow.
You know, how he's thought about doing that and how he was thinking about doing it and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, well, that's a pretty big deal, John. You know, so I want you just to, you know, do what I'm telling you to do.
Yeah.
And get on a bus and come home and just, you know, I blow up an air mattress on my bedroom floor and you will stay there until we figure this out. That seemed to get him through it.
Okay.
Just having that escape hatch, just knowing that was there seemed to give him relief. At least I seemed to. This is what I saw going on. Because suddenly he seemed to get better. He got through his school year. He graduated. He had already been accepted into a graduate program, also at Binghamton. He stayed at Binghamton, started the graduate program end of August, beginning of September. In February, he killed himself.
Oh my God.
Maybe me and Mo were already in California at the time. I wanted him to come and live with us in California. That must be it. I wasn't in New York anymore. I was in California.
Okay.
Whatever. Same story.
Right.
I told him just come and live with us. Because we were in California. We'd been there a year or two when this happened. And my mother had a cousin out there, a first cousin, you know, so her generation, who lived in Orange County. And they called us up and said, "Oh, we're going to come over." Me and Julia, and, you know, cousin and cousin's husband, we're going to be in LA, in the LA area. Why don't we take you guys out for dinner? Great. So they come over to the house and tell me, "David, sit down. I have to tell you something. Your brother John killed himself."
Oh my God.
She said, I think she said, "John is dead. He killed himself." And my first thought was, wow, he actually went through it.
Yeah.
And I remember her staring at me and crying and said, "Why aren't you crying? Why aren't you reacting?" And I was just like, because I was just like, wow.
Oh my God.
And I remember my first reaction was, I don't even know what to do. You know, he did it. It's over. And Mo was like, my husband, for those of you who don't know, you know him well, was like, "David, we need to get plane tickets. We need to go home. You need to be with your parents, blah, 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 blah." So, you know, we did all that. And we got home and found out that John had left everybody something, like he had a will.
Really?
But not like, you know, his car, his house, not like that. Like he left me all of his journals. And he left my father this particular trinket that reminded him of him. And he left my mom, I forget what, but they were all very, very personal things. And one friend, members of the family, the four of us who were left, and one friend who was very, very close, a girl named Rana, who I'm still on and off in touch with, left us all these very, very personal things.
Did you go through those journals?
Not all of them. But the last two entries of his journal are written to me.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, David.
And one of the things that's really interesting is, I mean, there's so much that's interesting. They have on his death certificate that the day he died was February 18th. That's actually the day they found him, because his classmates were getting worried and they didn't know where he was. And they finally broke into his apartment and found his body.
Wow.
But I know that he actually died on February 15th, because it was the day after Valentine's Day that I spoke to him on the phone. And he was bitching about being home for Christmas. And mom and dad, they're the same. They're just out of their minds and this and that and blah, 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 blah. And in fact, I just found recently, because we're going through my parents' house that we're selling, I found pictures from that Christmas, which I'd never seen.
Wow.
The Christmas right before he died. And the last letter says, that he wrote to me, says, "I just got off the phone with you and I'm going to do it now." That's how it starts.
Oh my goodness.
Approximately those words. And he describes to me how he's doing it and all this other stuff, you know, and, you know, other things, you know, personal things, basically, you know, explaining why he had to do it and explaining. But it wasn't until then, it wasn't until after his death that, you know, reading through all those last things that he sent to each of us and all that we all came to realize that he had been in such pain for so long, like from childhood. He says he had wanted to kill himself since he was a kid. Something I cannot, in my lifetime of being, we were like, and my older brother, we were all close. We were very close. We never fought. We all got along very well. My brother and me are still close. We're a very, very tight-knit family. But me and John, it was like, because we were, the way, my brother and Tom is 1.5 years, and John is 1 year and 4 months, but I'm the middle kid. But the way it worked out date-wise, he was 2 grades ahead of me, and John was only 1 grade behind.
Yeah.
So we really had the same, like, clique of friends.
Yeah.
And so, but in that, being that close our whole life, there was even one overlapping year. He started at Binghamton, my second year at Binghamton, and then I transferred out of Binghamton. So it was even a year when we were both living upstate together. You know, that intimate relationship that I had, he was gay. You know, we both kind of had to dealt with that together in our family.
Right.
With all of that, I didn't know this about him, that he was in that much pain for that long.
So, you know, you say that your mother was really, really aware of this kind of stuff. Did she have a hunch?
I think after my brother's death is when she just clued in. I think after my brother's death, I'm pretty sure after my brother's death is the first time my mother was ever in therapy. I mean, my mother went into therapy after that and was put on Prozac.
Right.
Which I don't know, you know, how I feel about it. For a lot of people, certainly, I have a feeling you might have opinions, you know, one way or another, but it's certainly overprescribed. But at that time, and she will say, you know, when I have said that, you know, did you really need it? She's like, yes, I absolutely needed it.
Right.
I couldn't get out of bed. I couldn't get through the day.
Right.
You know, my parents talk about, you know, each of them taking turns, literally being the one who forced the other one to get out of bed. Yeah. After my brother's death, you know, trying to figure out a way to go on with their life.
Right.
But my mother did eventually, you know, not having been told by her doctor or her therapist or anyone, on her own made the choice to get off of it. How
did she do that? Do you know if she tapered off or if she just stopped?
I'm pretty sure she tapered off.
Okay. Because it could be dangerous just stopping on your own.
Yeah. And just kind of decided to be, I don't want to sound like this is a judgment, but to be strong or to be, you know, to find it in her or I guess, you know, the way I know a lot of people on medications like that who describe it as, you know, there's a good side of it. It's fixing what I needed fixed, but there's also a bad side of it because it's creating all these other realities, which I don't think are real. So, you know, she felt like she was ready to go back to, you know, being in her own head. Right. And, you know, making up her own mind about how she was feeling, I guess.
Right.
So she did go off of it and never went back on it.
Well, see, that is the thing with those medications. They do provide a sense of relief, and they know them to work at least 8 weeks. That's usually what the trials are. After that, they stop the trials. So nobody knows the long-term effects of these drugs except by anecdotal information from people who are on them. So I'm definitely want to say I'm not anti-taking something, but I just wish there was a exit plan.
Right.
That was given at the time that the prescription was given. So, you know, like, oh, let's try this for a few months. This will help take the edge off, help you get out of bed. You know what I mean? Help you function. And then we can reconsider. I think a lot of people who are critical of the way psychiatry works right now, it's supposed to be like psychobiosocial. All these things are affecting your mental illness, but it became like bio. Right. That's the only thing that they look at. And that was a problem. In fact, the World Health Organization last year announced that, no, we are going to start looking at other social factors, environmental factors, because those things never get fixed. You know what I mean?
Right.
And in your family's case, it does seem to be something that it's not necessarily something that's easily identifiable, but if he was experiencing so much pain, what happens is it just keeps going on, and
Right.
it gets deeper and deeper. And so if there's not like, a way for you to get out of it, and you know what, here's the bottom line with mental illness, there isn't any easy answers.
Right.
So that's, I feel, why there's so many issues and problems with the way they treat things today, because they make it like, oh yeah, we know what it is. We're going to listen to you for 15 minutes and give you a diagnosis and give you the meds and you'll be okay. Like, that's not.
Well, you just describe what happened to my mother at the end of her life.
Okay. So that's an interesting thing, because I remember recently when I was painting you recently.
Yeah.
And then when you were telling me what she was experiencing at the end of her life, it broke my heart, because I'm thinking this is like really what we want to try to avoid.
Right. I don't even know what to do with it, with what happened to her. My mother was a very active and alive woman. She was 87 years old, but, very physically really fit, mentally slipping a little as 87-year-olds do, repeating herself a lot and that kind of thing. But, big functioning and had neighbors helping her out, and me and my brother, very capable, very socially active. Played mahjong, had a game on Tuesday, another game on Saturday with the old ladies down the block, and always walked to the library to go to the book club, and would get her own shopping with her little cart up to the shopping center, which is a long walk. Like, she got exercise, She walked slowly, but she did. She was, kept herself awake, would call me and talk about the Rachel Maddow show, and she, so a pretty together woman for 87. And then COVID hit, and she was suddenly all alone. We came and visited when we finally could, and a lot of things in her life disappeared. Her mahjong games disappeared. Her book club disappeared. A lot of the friends who in the neighborhood who used to come over, that stopped happening. She suddenly became a shut-in in this house that at one time housed 5 people, and now it was just her. Mm-hmm. In this house on Long Island. So it was, and she's 87. COVID hit when she was 85 and a half. We had fortunately had a beautiful 85th birthday for her. Big, huge party on my roof. So that was nice that we got to celebrate it before lockdown.
Yeah.
And, but then, between 85 and 87, it was visible, the changes. You could see her getting worse mentally. I knew she read the paper, and she would get the Sunday Times, and it would take her days to read every single section of the Sunday Times. She was good about, trying to keep her head active, but still, so little by little, there was a lot of deterioration, and a lot of it was just emotional. Yeah. A lot of it was just, she was depressed. She would tell us how lonely she was.
Yeah.
How sad she was, thinking about my father all the time, who had died a few years before, and all that stuff. So then, recently, because she passed away in April 8th, she was born on October 8th. So she lived exactly 87 and a half years. She had, like everybody else, her medical visits had slowed down during that time, and she hadn't had a checkup in a while, and she went for a checkup, and she went with, I don't want to rag on my brother, but I wish I had been there, because I think I would have asked certain questions, and I did try to ask the questions afterward, but I come home and I see that they put her on a new medication. I come to the house, that Saturday or whatever, and my brother had taken her for the checkup.
What kind of medication was it?
It was some antidepressant. I didn't know what it was. My brother's like, they put her on this new medication. I'm like, what's the medication? And I look it up, and it says that it's an antidepressant.
Oh, boy.
I want to say Deloxa.
Oh, Deloxetin.
That's it.
Which is Cymbalta.
Yes.
Okay.
So
it's an SNRI, a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor.
right.
It takes, it's affecting those pathways that would affect emotions. So
Right. So I'm like, why are they giving her this antidepressant? I mean, she probably was bitching and moaning about, oh, my life this, my life that, da 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 da, to the doctor, because she's alone and doesn't have her bridge games, her mahjong games anymore. Or, she was probably just, whining as she tends to. And the doctor decides to put her on this antidepressant.
And he didn't discuss it with her family, with you guys? Anybody?
She did not. Or maybe she talked about it with my brother. My brother, unfortunately, also he has MS. You wouldn't mind my saying that. So, he has some cognitive issues. And I don't know if he necessarily remembers everything that she said. But so I called the doctor and spoke to the doctor's assistant and I said, I want to know why they put her on this antidepressant. Right. The doctor never got on the phone with me.
Oh my God.
I only spoke to the assistant, and the assistant says, the doctor wants her to stay on it for a month and he's going to see her again. And then we'll make an evaluation. And I'm like, so I'm not getting an answer to my question.
Wow.
That was on, a weekend. I didn't see her again during the week. My brother was probably over there. And I came over and we were doing her shopping at the time. We were doing all her shopping. Me and Mo would come over and we would, bring her to the stores or we would buy things for her. A lot of times we would, get out of the house with her, take her to the supermarket. And we had bought all of these like pre-cooked meals. There's a big Italian deli in her neighborhood, wonderful place. All these pre-packaged, so it's got a meat or a fish and a vegetable and this, because she didn't want to cook anymore. She's too old to cook. She could just warm these up and have these meals. And we made all this chicken that we breaded and baked, and she had all of that stuff. She had all this food in the house, all these fruits and vegetables. I went back a week later, and it was all still there. I'm like,
she stopped
what
eating.
Are you eating? She's like, oh, I'm not hungry. You're not hungry. You still have to eat. She's saying she's eating breakfast. I don't know if that's true or not, because she would make oatmeal or something. I'm like, what are you? I'm like freaking out that she's not eating.
Yeah.
And I forget exactly the conversation we had about it, but we kind of, made it even easier for her to eat, or like, you need to, I want you to have this amount this day, da, 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 da. That was on a Saturday. On a Sunday, I call her and she's sitting in the chair in the living room. She's like, oh my God, I just tried to go for a walk. And she used to walk, even on days when she wasn't shopping. She'd walk around the block. Everybody knew her from all her walking. She said she got to the house next door and she had to stop. She got dizzy and weak. She turned around, came home. She didn't collapse or anything, but she made it to the chair. She got dizzy and weak. I called my nephew who lives nearby on Long Island. He got there first, then me and Mo got there. Rushed her to the hospital. They're, hydrating her and all this stuff. And, and I keep saying, I keep telling people over and over, that was another very frustrating situation. I never once spoke to a doctor. I tried over and over again to speak to a doctor. I told the same story to so many nurses. She's, I kept trying to tell them over and over again, listen, she was fine until she went on this medication and suddenly she stopped eating.
Yeah.
She wasn't eating. She had no food in her. That's why she got weak. Her blood pressure was very low and blah, 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 blah. So eventually she was in this hospital for a week or so or a little longer. And eventually they moved her to a rehab facility. And she was at the rehab facility and doing much better. I visited her there all the time, eating, not complaining as much, although mentally definitely deteriorating a bit. And then they had a meeting, all of the people at the rehab place, her social worker and her physical therapist and her this and her that and her blah, blah, blah. The way they have these meetings, and they came up with a plan, and she's going to be here 3 to 6 more weeks, and then she's going to need to go home with some kind of assistance and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, sure. we'll do whatever has to be done. Even, I mean, she's freaking out. She doesn't want someone living in her house. And I'm like, me and Mo will move in with you. Don't worry. Whatever has to be, we will do.
Aww.
And then something happened in her brain. And I think suddenly there was bleeding in her brain.
Oh my God.
And she just was gone in a few days. But it seems to me that the trigger was this medication they put her on.
Because that's when it all went downhill.
Because her body can't handle not eating for a week.
I will tell you that a friend of mine, I remember when we had discussed this before, I had mentioned this to you, and it's so important to understand because a lot of people in their late years, they are prescribed these psych meds for really oftentimes off-label reasons. Like there's they just, they feel like it'll calm them down or like maybe take an edge off or whatnot. But it seems to be difficult for a lot of older people to take on these meds. A friend of mine were put on because of a reaction he had to something that he was in the hospital for. They put him on antipsychotics, no less.
Yeah.
And he suffered so badly that they were basically writing him off, saying to the family, well, there's nothing else we can do. And then my best friend was just like, no, there's something else you can do. You could take him off the meds.
Yeah.
And when they finally did, he did end up getting better. So my feeling is if you're going to put people on these medications, because I think that there's been such a whitewashing of what these medications are. And, there's a lot of talk about like, oh, don't pill shame me, or, it's okay to take drugs. Listen, I'm not judging anybody that reaches for it. My feelings about them are having to do with the distributing of it, because they don't tell you how dangerous they are, what side effects you can get, and the fact that they just like kind of put you on them forever because there's no exit plan.
Right.
People have to understand that the fact that there's no plan to get off them means that you have to do it on your own, which means that you might have to start getting compound liquids made. You need the prescriptions to make that happen. So most of the time, a psychiatrist won't give you that prescription to make that happen because he might say, well, you still need to stay on it. So there's a lot of encouraging towards long-term use. And for someone like your mother, I mean, to put that into her, treatment plan when she's weak, you know what I mean?
Right. Based on a 15-minute conversation during a checkup.
This is how they do it. Yeah.
Suddenly she's on a drug.
The fact that they never got in touch with you. Now, this wasn't a psychiatrist either. This was a general practitioner.
Yep.
And this is one of the problems too. A lot of psychiatrists are upset with the general practitioners because they're doing making these, prescribing these drugs, and they really don't know how serious these things are. They're used so quickly as a solution.
Right.
For things that don't really, they don't have that much experience with, a lot. I will say that at least with psychiatrists, you can say, well, they do see a lot of people. So they can pull from their experience, and that's what they're usually, leaning on. But for GPs, I'm sure your mother was on other medications, right?
Yeah, blood pressure related and things like that.
Yeah. So like there's a lot of the times there's, problems with contraindications with these, with one drug used against the other. So it's like, what do you do? We want to feel that we're in the hands of doctors who are doing the right things and taking care of us and, making decisions. But I really do believe that consent is a big thing. And if people can't consent for themselves, then there should always be family members involved with treatment plans. I mean, the fact that you weren't even told and they never got on the phone with you. They never got on the phone with you.
No, I called her. It was so annoying. We
have to require more involvement from the medical establishment to get us involved. And also, I do want to bring up the fact that during COVID, there was so much going on with people kind of stopping that activity. And for older people, we know that it's so important for them to keep active and to keep, doing things and being involved with the world. And yet a lot of people did fall into isolation and non-activity because of the nature of what we were required to do to get this thing under control. So it's sad to me because I know other people who have experienced similar things with parents who then ended up getting dementia or whatnot. So these things that do occur, naturally when you do get older, you have these things. Why add the additional risk onto your body to, okay, now you have to now have this medication going through your system? It's very hard to process these medications.
And at her age, to just start on something brand new.
Why?
The doctor knew she lived alone.
I mean, I'm wondering if she was complaining about a lot about depression.
I don't know. She might have used the word depressed because she uses that word a lot. My mother, everything is about depression. She's constantly, that person, she's depressed. Or, that person, he's depressed. And are you sure you're not depressed? She just thinks about it a lot.
Yeah.
Or is at least, maybe a better thing to say is she's scared of it a lot.
Right.
So she's constantly on the lookout for it.
Right.
So I can just imagine her in the doctor's office. She got going and she went with it and she just kept talking.
Yeah.
And the doctor interpreted what she said as, she's down, she's depressed, she's this, she's that. That might have just been the kind of day she was having. And certainly, she was, often complaining about, how this whole situation has been really tough for her, that she's lost so much of her social life. She was very aware of why all this was happening. She was very aware of the fact that, she was in the head she was in because she was suddenly alone and she was suddenly not able to, do all the things that kept her mind alive and kept
right. Her. And then, maybe just getting in touch with that, or, as time would have moved on, she would have then eventually entered the world again.
Yeah.
It's like this natural course of events for the human experience is often ignored or overlooked in favor of a quick fix.
Right.
We'll take care of her moods right now and let's just give her this and she'll be fine. Like, it's, to me, the end of life treatment,
right,
where a lot of these things are being added to the variety of meds that these older people are already on. Why complicate the issue? And I will say this, a lot of the times the GPs don't even realize the complicating factors of many of these drugs put together. And you think that they would.
Right.
Firstly, I want to thank you for being so open and honest and really sharing your personal history, because the reason why I think it's so important to give a voice to this is because so many of us have histories in mental illness in our family. And it's very curious to me, because a lot of people are like, well, some people have, it's in their family, that's why they have it. But if you look at everybody's family, there's usually a story. Whoever, somebody committed suicide, somebody had, depression where they couldn't get out of bed, somebody had, this, that. Most people can point to something. So does that mean we're all at risk? Yeah, because we're all human. You know what I mean? We don't know where all these things come from. And the fact that you're like, oh, I have this weak gene. Well, it's really, first of all, if you look at the genetics, there's no one gene that causes anything. They know that these things are highly complex. In fact, all of this money that they've been pouring into mental illness, research relating to genetics since the 1990s, since the Human Genome Project, it's just been almost like wasted, because there's nothing. In fact, Tom Insel, who used to lead the National Institute of Mental Health from 2002 until 2015, just wrote a book. And the book is called Healing: Our Path from Mental Illness to Health. And he directly deals and exposes the idea that we poured all of this time and energy and money into looking at genetics, and really we haven't come away with anything that we've learned. Like, because it's so complex that why we keep going down this path. everybody has a weakness. Okay. Every family has some kind of genetic composition that could lead to something, but that's not always the factors that compile together to make us go in these directions. And it could just be the very stressful experience of living. The thing, though, that I love about your story is that it proves how hard it is to identify the causes.
Right.
Because the fact that your brother is only, he's so close to you in age, and you both had the experience of being gay, and you have the same family, and you went one way and he went the other way. And it seems as though you have this stable family that everybody's pretty supportive.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because everyone's just like, oh, what is the cause? But sometimes it's we can't get to the cause so easily. It's just really about how do we try to improve our lives daily, and what kind of coping strategies can we incorporate into our lives so that these things are less likely.
You just said so many things that just triggered so many things. But one of them was, how interesting it was that me and my brother, we were like this growing up, always, so close growing up, lived like parallel lives in so many ways. And yet we ended up being such different people. And I'll never forget a conversation. We were talking about my parents, as we often do, when we were both fighting with them when we were teenagers or whatever. Probably I was at college, and remember this conversation on the phone. And I don't remember all the details of what was going on, but something involving my parents. And, because he was telling me, how we need to approach them. And I was telling him how we need to approach them. And I was like, John, why do you tiptoe over mom and dad like they're made out of glass? And he said, David, why do you plow through them like a Mack truck? Well, I'm still here. That's my answer to it now. And I know that one of my, mechanisms has always been that. In fact, the story of how I came out to my parents. I was in NYU as one of my last, I think my last or second to last year of college, had my first boyfriend. I had like a pull-out bed underneath, but it was late and we were tired, and I was like, oh, just get in bed with me. So, it's just the two of us go into a, little small twin bed, just sleep. You get up in the morning and leave. So my father gets up early. I didn't realize he was getting up that early because he was going into work that day. I didn't realize, on a Saturday. And he peeks in the room to see if David got home last night.
Oh my God.
And finds David and David in bed, because his name was David also, my boyfriend. And I remember waking up and seeing him, and he's like, he shuts the door and leaves. I'm like, oh God, now we have to have the conversation. A little while later, my mother, the same thing. My father must have told him. My mother looks at, that's the door. And I'm like, so, and it's not like they didn't already know.
Kind of know, yeah.
I mean, not for nothing, I was the dance captain of the High School Musicals. I mean,
they
knew, or at least, strongly suspected that it was a possibility, and I had girlfriends here and there, so I gave them hope, but didn't work out. So then I got out of bed, and my father was gone by that point. My mother was out. I think she was shopping, and she came home, and I remember her saying to me, she said, we're not talking about this. Yes, I know. David's not my friend. He's my boyfriend. And my mother said something to the effect of, well, he's not allowed in this house anymore. And I said, I just remember looking at her, because one thing I learned from my older brother is my mother will go crazy in a Sicilian kind of way. And the way to counteract that is to remain completely calm.
Yeah.
And I just looked at her, and I remember saying, fine, but there's going to come a time when if he's not welcome in this house, I'm not going to come to this house.
Mm.
So that's me being a Mack truck.
Right.
I didn't ease them into it. I didn't give them a chance.
Right.
I said, you have to deal with this. This is the day we are dealing with this.
Yeah.
Period.
Right.
The day I told her, shortly after I met Mo, because when I met Mo in 1983, it was like nothing else ever in my life. We knew immediately. He says he fell in love with me before we even spoke. I knew within a week.
Yeah, you guys are perfect.
That this was it. We're going to be together forever.
You just know.
So my mother always has recounted so many times the day she was in the city and she met me for lunch. And I said to her, Mom, I met the guy I'm going to marry.
Aw.
Something probably people didn't say as much in 1983 or 84 by this point. We met December 18th, as they say now. So my brother, then 2 years later, my brother took his life. And what's always interesting to me is my parents my parents had joined PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. It's a support group.
Nice.
They're around the world. They're all over this country, and there are actually chapters around the world. There's a place where parents come and family members come and friends come to talk about their experiences having to deal with having somebody gay or trans in their family. And my parents started going because they really needed to go. But I guess by this point, they had become more tuned into the struggle that a lot of gay kids have, that a lot of gay teenagers have, a lot of gay young adults have, fitting in and dealing with their own sexuality, dealing with their own, let alone their parents dealing with it, but they themselves dealing with it in their own lives. I don't know that was so true with my brother. He went to school in Binghamton. We grew up in the city. We didn't in the city. We grew up in Nassau County, but we were in the city all the time. My parents were city people. I was a theater bug. Even though I wasn't out in high school, there was one person who was the year after me. It was a Jewish liberal high school on Long Island. It wasn't, and it was, I graduated in 79, but still, it wasn't, I wasn't living on a farm somewhere in the middle of nowhere. I was exposed to it. It was part of my life. I was in theater. I knew a lot of dancers. Gay people were all around me. I even had a drama teacher in high school who was openly gay. We would have cast parties at his house. Everybody knew his partner. And then John was in Binghamton, which of all of this areas, the little towns in upstate New York, is one of the gayest. Like, people in Pennsylvania get in their cars and drive 3 hours on a Saturday night to hang out in the gay bars in Binghamton.
Oh.
So even there, that wasn't it. But for some reason, my parents always had it in their head that it was him being gay that caused a lot of his depression and eventually his suicide. I don't really think that's true.
Right.
I think John was the way he was because he was the way he was.
Yeah.
And if he had been straight, it would have been the same.
Right.
But the fact that they thought that about him when he died, it made them go full force into being active members of PFLAG.
Wow.
And my, fade out, fade in, my father eventually became the president of the Long Island chapter. My mother was the head of the Speakers Bureau. They are known all over the place for they would go speak and do speaking engagements at schools,
That's
at
amazing.
all kinds of community organizations. They've been interviewed on television. They've been interviewed on radio. They eventually kind of outgrew PFLAG. They stayed involved, but they got involved with other organizations too, led lobbying efforts. When the New York State gay rights legislation came up, my mother was one of the people who went to Albany. I mean, my parents literally are responsible for my mother actually for the gay rights bill that passed in New York, because they had gone up to lobby, which they did, and they were meeting with various state senators, and one of the Republican state senators was not there and did not admit, and sent some assistant to greet them, and who obviously didn't care, was just taking notes. And my mother was so furious. She left all these nasty messages and left all these nasty photos. The guy eventually called, the senator himself called.
You're kidding.
To speak to my mother. And my mother was so angry, she made my father speak to him first, but then she got on the phone. And they had a very long conversation, and he agreed to meet with them again. So they met with him again. That Republican state senator, I wish I could remember all the names, but that Republican state senator, the day the bill came up for a vote, actually got up on the floor and spoke in favor of it and pushed it over the edge.
That's amazing.
So, I mean, they were very, very involved. They marched in Gay Pride Parade. Lots of great. Later in life, they sat them on the bleachers next to Margaret Cho. My mother was always so impressed with them.
That's amazing.
They were one time when they marched in Washington. They at one time they were honored by some, I don't quite know what it is, but it's like a coalition of gay rights organizations in the Long Island area. They threw a big dinner for them. Some, they have different honorees every year. My parents were honored.
Oh my gosh.
Time of work. They had spoken in my school. Me and Mo, you mentioned that I'm a writer. I write plays, and there was it's like gay. My plays are gay themed. There was this one play that we toured with. It was a one-man show I wrote for Mo, and we'd be in like LA, we'd be in Ireland, we'd be in one time we were on a cruise ship off the coast of Brazil, and somebody saw my name, and the people see my name in the program and come up to me and they're like, "Are you Tony and Annette's son?"
Get out.
And I'm like, "Yeah." And then they'd be like, "Oh, I'm gonna cry now." They'd be like, I heard your mother speak at my school, or your father. I worked with your father. He works so hard. He inspires everybody else to work, even harder, on these issues. And then they always say, "You're so lucky," and I always say, "I know," and I don't take it for granted.
Yeah,
I was really, really lucky. My parents went from having trouble dealing with me, the Mack truck, who pushed them through that wall. To becoming leaders of the LGBT rights movement, who literally celebrities. Everyone knew who they were.
That's incredible.
I say I don't think his gayness is why he killed himself, but whatever. It was largely because of their love for him that they did that.
Right.
To honor him as a young gay man who took his life.
That was their way to honor and celebrate who he was. And I mean, that's incredible.
Their foundation in this arena was PFLAG, Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. So that was always the most important thing to them, was families. And they, wanted to, get as many other people to, whether they're the parents or the kids, to be able to stay together as families.
Yes.
To know that, to be able to reach out to their kids and to be able to love their kids, and for kids not to end up. I did as a lawyer. I worked for many years with homeless LGBT kids who get thrown out of their homes.
Wow.
Who end up in the foster care system or living on the streets. My parents, knew about that work. It was something that they wanted to, address before it happened. Keep families together.
Yeah. Yeah. So there are these positive outcomes when you want to make a difference, when you've gone through a lot. And I have to say, that's an incredible story.
And I think that's how they healed themselves.
Yes,
not only from his suicide, but from other things in their own life. It gave them a purpose. My father was an anti-war activist. He was a conscientious objector during the Korean War, got out of serving. And during the Vietnam War, he voluntarily became a draft counselor, meaning that, when I was a kid, a lot of people my age don't even remember the Vietnam War. But for me, the Vietnam War is like all these 18-year-old boys, like sitting in my living room scared while my father was counseling them on the various deferments and on how to get out of serving in the war.
Wow.
Their mothers bursting through our kitchen door and crying and laughing when their sons got deferred. And my parents would march on Washington. And he was very involved in that. So I always say, I came out so my father would have another cause.
Yeah,
so
right.
He would have something to do with his time.
That's right.
Who they were.
That's right.
One of my ways, I think one of the ways that I have always dealt with this, and this circles back to, my brother tiptoeing on ice and me plowing through it like a Mack truck. I consider myself very fortunate that at a relatively young age, I got involved in physical activity.
Yes.
I became a dancer in high school. And then I started studying weight training when I was in college. And then after I met Mo, he actually circled an ad in Backstage magazine. They were looking for trainers at the Paris Health Club and made an interview with me without even asking me. And I went up and got the job. And then we moved to LA and I became a fitness trainer in LA and I managed Richard Simmons Club and I taught at 10 different clubs.
Oh my gosh.
Taught aerobics classes for years, running and screaming and dancing and laughing and all this great music. And then I was a private trainer. And then, that became a big part of my life. And after I stopped doing that for a living, I still continued to do it,
Right.
And I think that for me I think there's absolutely a chemical relationship between that kind of activity. But for me, it was definitely one of the things that sort of gave me power. And yes. I know that it became something that I taught my mother because my father was not good about that. He was terrible about exercising and he would, Eventually, he would do this walk through the shopping center around Union Turnpike, back up Lakeville Road, and stop at the Dunkin' Donuts every morning on the way home. But my mother really learned the lesson I taught her. And she was taking Muay Thai classes, and she was taking, go to her aqua aerobics. And when she was older and during COVID, she walked and walked and walked and walked and walked. And that greatly affected her mental state.
Absolutely. We know physical exercise, it's the release of endorphins and all the things that need.
When people ask me what my drug is, that's what it is. It's endorphin.
Exactly. And that's one of the main things that, again, if they looked at other ways to treat things, they would push more. You know what I mean? That immediately one of the things that they should definitely give to you as a prescription is an exercise prescription.
Yep. Oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that.
But I will tell you, when you get on heavy meds at first, you can't do things physically, because the meds really affect your body. So it disables you to actually come about with personal strategies and solutions to get yourself out of that, because now you're just like dependent on these drugs, So I think it's great that you were able to go in the direction of finding something that was so healing. And really, to this day, you're 61, David, you look fantastic.
I actually had a checkup last week or the week before, and the first thing the doctor said was, "I can't believe you're 60." And I said, "I'll be 61 in a couple of weeks." And he was like, you're in perfect health.
It's true. You are in perfect shape.
Being 60 and now 61 in next week, when I think of the different phases of my life, and a lot of it, because I've been so involved in physical activity and, fitness, break down into phases in terms of fitness. And the phase that I'm at now, I call it reaping the rewards, because I am at an age now where so many people around me, and I'm in touch with everyone from high school on Facebook, and I know a lot of people, they're falling apart.
Yes.
Even the ones who aren't falling apart are kind of falling apart. And everyone's like, "Oh, you do, it's different now. You wake up with aches and pains." I'm like,
and you're like, no.
I don't.
Right.
Oh, no, I used to be able to do that. Oh, I can't do that anymore. I'm like, yes, I can. There's nothing I can't do anymore. I can't think of anything I can't do anymore. One of the reasons people always say, "Oh, you're such a good model." Yeah, because I can stand here for 7 hours.
Exactly.
I don't need to sit. "Oh, do you need to take a break? Oh, do you need to sit? Do you need to take?" No, I'm good. I'm having so much fun.
You're perfect. It's like you're a mannequin. We love it.
I know. Whatever you need. Hold your arms up while it dries. Sure. Whatever.
Well, listen, David, thank you so much for coming through and opening up. And I feel like your story is going to help many people, because they're going to identify with your story and in their own lives.
Well, that's one of the great things. When I think about the history from my, great uncle who killed himself, through my grandmother, through my parents, through my brother, through now, we have learned to talk about it. Yes. I think is one of the most important things.
Absolutely.
And one of the things I love about your show. We've really learned, we have a language for it.
Yes.
Living in LA helped me that, because they were a few years ahead of New York, in that. Everyone got it. Everyone understood the language of mental health before people here did. But now everyone does.
Yeah.
We know what you're talking about. It's not a mystery. It's not a secret.
Right.
It's okay to say you need help. It's okay to say there are things you don't understand.
Exactly. Amen for the conversation.
Yep.
Thanks for listening to Not As Crazy As You Think, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And remember, mental health is attainable for anyone, especially those labeled with mental illness. Until next time, peace out.